Everyone, today's data science interview question is by Facebook. It's called Closed Accounts. So today's question is by Facebook. It's called Closed Accounts. The question reads, assuming we have the total number of accounts that were opened and closed by date in the Facebook accounts table, compute the percentage of accounts that were closed on January 10th, 2020. All right, this looks like a pretty straightforward question. The first thing I want to take a look at is the underlying data. So I'm going to hit preview here. So here we have account ID, date, and status. So it looks like I'll be filtering by the date and then counting the number of accounts that are closed, as well as counting the number of total accounts that were both closed and open on January 10th, 2020. All right, so next let's write up the approach before we start coding. All right, so it looks like the first thing I want to do is filter this table by date. So I'm going to write filter table by date. It's going to be January 10th, 2020, and that's the format of the date there. So once I have the table filtered by date, what I want to then do is flag the closed statuses and then flag the open statuses. So the numerator is going to be the status where it says closed here. So I can do a count where status equals closed. That's going to be my numerator. And then I can do a count where status is open and closed. That's going to be my denominator. So then after that, we can take the numerator and the denominator and perform that percentage formula. Here we're going to have to convert this into a float because both of these will be integers. And so an integer divided by an integer is an integer. So what we want to do is change the data type to a float or a decimal. So you'll have something that is less than 1, and then we can multiply by 100 to get that percentage. So what I'm going to write now is multiply that by 100 to get the percentage. And that essentially will complete this approach. So what we can do now is just start coding. All right, so the first thing we want to do is filter this table by date. So we are going to just reformat things a little bit here. Add a where clause where date is equal to 01/10/2020. All right, so if we run this code, we should get a table now that essentially has accounts the date of January 10th, 2020, and the status is both open and closed. And this is exactly what we're looking for. So now what we want to do is cherry pick the statuses where we have closed. And so with that, I'm going to use a case when. Case when status is equal to closed, then I'm going to add the account ID here. Right, so this completes the case when. I want to add a count here. And I'll just say closed for closed accounts. So let's actually just run this real quick to see what we get. What I want to also add here is a distinct, because I'm counting account IDs, and there is an edge case, or there is a scenario where a user can open or close multiple accounts on the same day. And because we are trying to calculate the percentage of closed accounts, we don't necessarily want to count multiple of the same accounts. And so we have the number of closed accounts, and the next thing we want to do is now flag the number of open accounts and use that in our denominator. So I'm going to follow the exact same format here where the status is going to be open. All right, so if we run this query just to check that it works, it looks like it does work. All right, so we have the number of closed accounts and the number of open accounts. And so what we want to do now is implement the percentage formula to figure out the percentage of closed accounts on January 10th, 2020. So I'm going to use this query as a subquery here. Now to implement the percentage formula, I'm going to have the count of closed accounts here divided by both the count of closed and open accounts. So that's the denominator, open plus closed. And then as I wrote here, I want to convert these integers to a float or a decimal, and then multiply that by 100, because I want to convert then the decimal into a percentage. And I'm going to name the column closed percentage. And if I run this query, I should get the answer, which is 45%. And so if I check the solution, it looks like my solution is correct. So that's one way to answer this question. There are different ways to write the solution. So one thing I actually want to talk about is where I can add this where clause right here, right? So in this solution, I put the where clause in the subquery, but I can also put the where clause outside the subquery where I put it essentially here. And then how I would refactor the subquery is I would actually just put a date here, and then I can add like a group by date so that I have the count of closed, the count of opens by date, and then that's in the subquery. And so I just need to then ensure that when I'm implementing the percentage formula, I'm just filtering by that specific date. So the trade-off here is that if this table is huge, you're essentially doing a lot of work, and it's going to take a lot of time for the server or the computer to actually compute this table before you're applying this filter. The trade-off there, the advantage is that if you actually want to see the percentage of closed accounts over multiple days, this would be a better way of writing this code, because what you can do is then get rid of that and write date here, and then group by date, and you probably need a group by closed and open as well. And so if you run this code, what you get is the closed percentage by date. And this is pretty nice just to take a look at how the closed percentage changes over days. So in both approaches here, I'm using a case when clause. I don't actually have to use that to answer this question. I could use the left join. And so if I were to use the left join, this is what it's going to look like. All right, so this is the left join SQL query right here, where I'm essentially looking at all of the closed accounts in this left join subquery. And then I am joining it back to the master table, Facebook account status, where it has both account statuses where it's open and closed. So then what I want to do is then filter by date. And if I do that and I run this query, what I'm going to get is essentially accounts that are both open and closed on January 10th. And then the left join attaches only the closed status here, right? And so this is a great visual to be able to then implement the percentage formula, because what I want to do is count all of this at the top here, because these are closed accounts, and divide it by the total number of rows. And so that's going to look like this. Okay, so what I have essentially is I have the numerator here, which is my left joined table, which includes only the closed accounts. So I'm counting these rows only. And then I have the denominator, which counts all of the rows in the master table, the A table right here. So it's going to count all of these rows right here. And if I convert that into a float, multiply it by 100 to get a percentage, I get the closed percentage. So I've run this query, I get the exact same answer. If I check the solution, I should get it right, and I do. So you can either use a case when clause to answer this question, or you can use a left join to answer this question.